All right, sorry for the slides on the side, but I think this will make it easier for me to actually go forward. So our preliminary research is showing that there's certain employee preferences out there right now. Many of you are probably surveying your employees like GBCOG is right now to see what people want. This is some national research that is paralleling what we're finding from our employees, that 58% of people are actually going to consider staying in a job if there are remote options, but leaving if there aren't. And only 2% actually really want to go back full-time in the office. And many employees are actually reporting that they're saving quite a bit of money from being able to have the option of working remote. This is mostly by saving on commute costs. So we know that employees really do want to work from home. There are some considerations because different demographic groups have different preferences. Of course, individuals have different preferences, but there are some aggregate data that we've started to see around women, people of color, and younger workers. And for women, the pandemic, as we all know, hit women disproportionately because they tend to carry the disproportionate amount of caregiving, both for older adults and also for kids. So, when kids were home from school, it was really difficult for women to be able to balance their full-time jobs with the remote schooling. But that said, there is some flexibility going forward that women really do want to see. Now, there's a bit of an issue here for women as they go back. If more men tend to opt to be in the office than women, then those men may have the opportunity to interface with senior management more, may have more opportunities for trainings and mentorship. And so there could be a disproportionate impact on women's careers if more women stay home. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We're also finding that for people of color, there's a higher preference for having some remote options. We haven't dived deep enough into this to understand what the reasons are yet, but we will be looking at that. And then also younger workers actually want to be more in the office. And that is also for the same reasons that women might be disproportionately impacted, which is that they need some mentorship. They value the in-person collegial time. They want to have access to decision makers. So there's more preference there. Now, as all of you know, this slide is from McKinsey. And McKinsey was showing, and Quincy was saying this just before we all jumped on the call together, is that most employers, and you can see this in the black in the left-hand side, 80% of their employees were in the office full-time. And as you go post-COVID, about 10% of employers are expecting to have 80% of their workforce in full-time. So you can see that there are most employers, it's actually 9 out of 10, are expecting that they need to offer some sort of hybrid workforce options. And the main point here is that in order for Maine businesses to be competitive, particularly as we are competing now against national employers who may want to use some of our Maine employers, Maine employees, that it is really important for our competitiveness to be able to offer some flexibility and choice to our employees who have come to expect it. The last point I want to make about the possible benefits of hybrid work is the climate mitigation benefits. And as many of you know, the state workers, all those that were able to go remote did at the beginning of the pandemic. And the research that the state did show that per week, 1 million miles were not driven that would normally be driven. So that's a pretty big impact on greenhouse gases. What we don't know, and we're going to be looking into, is whether people may make more trips if they're staying at home. And we also know that if parents are bringing kids to school or to daycare, they may still need to make those trips instead of trip chaining it, dropping somebody at daycare and then going to work. So there is some research that needs to be done on this, but we have seen even pre-COVID that there are climate benefits to allowing people to work from home. So the last thing I wanted to highlight is just the preliminary conclusions. Again, we need to do some more research on this, but the first is that our workforce really wants choice, and that to compete for talent, our employers are likely going to have to offer that kind of choice. And then lastly, as you're thinking about designing your hybrid options, that we need to keep both gender and racial equity in mind, and also think about how we can best serve our younger workers. So with that, I will stop and just let you know that we will have some additional research that is ready at the end of the summer, diving a little bit deeper into some of these issues. Thanks again, Quincy, for having me.
Kristina, that was fantastic. Those were some really interesting statistics. And I think the fact that only 2% of workers want to go back to the office full time has got to cause every employer to pause and to really think about that and what that's going to look like. So this work you're doing is absolutely incredible and essential. GPCOG is such a wonderful partner of the Chamber. We love working with you. You guys do such great and needed work, often behind the scenes. So Kristina, thank you for being here. Thank you for all you're doing at GPCOG. And we look forward to the results of this at the end of the summer.
Thanks, Quincy. And we feel the same about the Chamber.
You're awesome. Fantastic. So with that, I'd love to jump into some questions for our panelists. I'm going to start with Pete Herzog. He is our labor and employment lawyer from our other great and marvelous partner, Bernstein Shur. So Pete, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Mask mandates. So this is very interesting. I even noticed out in my own travels around town, like a lot of businesses requiring employees to be masked. What are you hearing from employers about mask mandates? Are people requiring them for all employees, only unvaccinated employees? Is it totally optional? Just want to get a sense of what your conversations have been with some of your clients.
Right. Thanks, Quincy, and thanks for having me on the panel here. Yeah, this has been kind of a sticky point with employers because you have different mandates. You have different federal government guidance. You have different guidance from the state CDC, from the governor. And so what we've been advising most of our clients, although some, they do whatever they want, either they can mandate for everyone, or as you said, they can make it completely optional. What we're advising is that employers maintain kind of a, if you're vaccinated, you're not required to wear a mask. It's optional. If you're not vaccinated, you are required to wear a mask. And there are a lot of different considerations behind that. One of which is, like I said, there is conflicting guidance from the federal government to the state government, and employers are bound by both state and federal law. And so to make sure that we're complying with all the guidance and not running afoul of any of it, we're advising that the employers basically take the more conservative approach. The other issue is, and Catherine may be aware of this, I don't know how much MEMIC has seen, but in certain circumstances, employers can file workers' comp claim. It doesn't mean that they're going to prevail at workers' comp, but they can file a claim if they contract COVID at the workplace. I think it's a hard thing to prove. But one of the ways that you can mitigate that risk is by requiring unvaccinated individuals to wear masks in the workplace. So that's generally kind of what we're seeing surrounding masks from our clients.
Interesting. My guess is we may have some questions from participants around that as we get into the Q&A segment. A follow-up question, actually a different question, but still for you, Pete. How are employers managing their hybrid workplaces, including issues like office sharing and different telecommuting policies?
So most of what we're seeing is, I think you mentioned it earlier, a lot of workplaces are now just transitioning out of the pandemic, and in this summer are trying to sort of do a post-mortem and trying to figure out, okay, what worked well, what didn't work well, how can we move forward in a way that works for our employees and works for our business model. So what I'm seeing is just a lot of transition right now, and I can speak to something that our firm is doing. We've really, I think, gotten ahead of the game in terms of what we're doing, in terms of developing a return to office advisory subcommittee that's comprised of individuals, attorneys, staff, administration, who are looking at what's happened over the past year, looking at jobs and tasks, what kind of jobs and tasks are best performed in the office versus remotely. We're looking at employee preferences, taking some of the data that Kristina was talking about and assessing what that means for the future, looking at projects, looking at inclusion and fairness. We and some of our clients, we've developed a return to office app. We've developed a health attestation app in which We're trying to better manage office placement, parking assignments, sort of being aware of who's coming in, when they're coming in. And, our CIO has really done an incredible job of putting this together. And so we're actually, I feel, ahead of the game in terms of transitioning to the hybrid model. The idea with us is, more like September, we're looking at sort of a rollout of the trial period of what this is going to look like post-pandemic. And I think I'm seeing the same thing from our clients. It's kind of the same idea. And some of them are using the app that we've developed. And frankly, I think just from a broader perspective, what I'm telling clients is I hear people use the phrase, we want to get back to normal, or we want to get back to where we were. And I'm trying to sort of, I'm trying to challenge that idea with a lot of clients, not necessarily from a legal perspective, but more from a management perspective. And that I don't think we want to get back. I mean, I'm trying to have them really think about looking forward and looking at how, we've learned a lot in the last 14 months. And this is just an incredible opportunity to really push ourselves into the future and do something really incredible here with our employees, with our businesses, in terms of how we're treating customers and clients. And so from a broader perspective, I'm trying to kind of push that idea of not getting back, but really moving forward into something that can really be extraordinary, given all the information that we've learned in the past 14 months.
Yeah, I am with you on that. I think we're going to be going towards a new normal. I don't think we want to go back to the way things were. I keep saying, don't let a good crisis go to waste. We just went through one of the biggest crises any of us have seen in our lifetime. And there were a lot of learnings, and there were some silver linings in COVID. And I think we should take those lessons, and we shouldn't just like kick them to the curb and go back to the way things were. I think we got smarter. I think we got more efficient in a lot of the ways we did things. And we really need to like hold on to that and bring that with us forward as we figure out what our new normal is going to look like. So I definitely appreciate what you just said there. Let's go to Catherine. I know Pete had mentioned, Matt, we were talking about masks, and maybe if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, that might kind of direct whether you are going to be required to wear a mask. Vaccine requirements. Now, this is a question I keep getting, and I'm not even entirely sure of the answer, but what are you hearing around employers mandating vaccines? Can they mandate vaccines? And is there a best practice in this area that we may all be able to take away from this call and learn from?
Well, thank you, Quincy, for inviting me to participate on your panel. I really am excited about this. Vaccines are a little bit tricky, and this is a challenge that the Maine Hospital Association has taken on as they look at healthcare workers and so forth. Mm-hmm. For us, we do not require vaccines for our employees. We have taken a position much like Peter described, where those that are not vaccinated can wear a face covering, while those that are not that have been vaccinated are not required for that. We've had our offices open for some time to about 50% of our population, and frankly, we're not close to that yet. We see people starting to venture in to see what's happening in the office and so forth, but it's not required. So vaccines from other employers, it's very specific to the employer, and we do not weigh in on anybody's vaccine requirements. It's very, very personal to the business, but that's what we've done. As we look at remote work and hybrid work and all of that, I'll say we have had remote workers for 27 years. So we've always had that. During this time, we have found that we have the technology the hardware, the software, to be remote for the majority of our population. We have employees in 22 states now, and I think is just going to increase and frankly make our workforce even better, because we have an opportunity to gain the expertise that doesn't reside right here in Greater Portland. So that's pretty exciting. As we look at hybrid work, we're trying to define what that is for our organization, and it's different for every organization. And I think that's where the struggle is. I think that's where we are today, trying to figure out what does hybrid mean to our organization. So we have put together a group that is going to be coming together for 2 sessions, facilitated sessions, to talk about hybrid work, what it means, talking about managing a hybrid workforce and how intentional that needs to be and what training needs to go with it. And then that group of employees are going to go back and take all of that information to our workforce and have facilitated discussions with them, so we can find what that hybrid definition means to our employees and how we can work that into a policy or a practice as we go forward. I think it's going to be a slow walk back to the office for some number of people. And in that process, we are also going to have to identify what are the essential functions that must be done in the office, and identify those and figure out how to make sure that those always happen and reward those people for doing that job.
Yeah, that's great. Those facilitated discussions, that's a really smart idea, and something that I may borrow from you. I'll talk to you about that offline. I guess a follow-up question for you, Catherine, is what are some of the biggest things that employers really need to keep in mind as they reopen their offices from like a public health and just like a liability standpoint?
What I see is that we really need to maintain our cleanliness, our protocols for cleanliness, to make sure that our workforce feels safe. Why would anybody want to go to a location that they didn't feel safe in? And I mean, let's face it, that's our business. We're in the safety business. So we want to make sure that, safety and cleanliness are paramount here for all MEMIC employees at every location. And when our employees go to call on and service our insureds, we want to make sure that we have protocols in place for them, so that when they enter your workspace, they feel safe as well. So we've put all of those kinds of practices in, and we have little kits that people take on the road with them to make sure that they are safe.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. And thanks for joining us. And thanks to MEMIC, who has been one of our longest standing partners within our chamber. So thanks for all that you guys do for us. It's so appreciated. And now I'd like to go to Nate with the Boulos company to talk about commercial real estate and commercial space, which I feel like is just one of those big questions out there. Like in a way, I could see businesses wanting to shrink their footprint, but then also in a way with what we just went through with social distancing, I can see businesses wanting to increase their footprint. So I'm just curious what you're seeing, Nate, around businesses. What are they looking to do? Are they looking to shrink footprints? Are they looking to continue with this shared space model that a lot of businesses have doing? Or are they going back to allowing employees to have their own stations or offices within the office? Just curious what you have, and I'm sure you've been hearing and seeing a lot, but what is it you've been hearing and seeing around businesses and what their needs are going to be for physical locations?
Yeah, thanks, Quincy, for that question. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. So it's a loaded question. I think Catherine alluded to earlier. It's different for every company, and that's what makes this so difficult, is that there's no one answer. Depending on the industry, depending on the size of the company, the location of the company, et cetera. I think it's probably a little too early to really say that there's any sort of trend that's shaping at this point. You were somewhat correct in that what we are seeing is companies obviously coming back. The hybrid plan is really seems to be what is going to be common moving forward. But I don't think that necessarily means less space. It certainly means different space, but not less space. I think if we rewind back to July and August, everyone was saying, oh, well, the private offices are back. Every employee will be in a private office. And now we're saying, well, no, not necessarily. I think there still need to be private spaces and private meeting spaces for individual employees. But in addition to that, there needs to be more collaborative spaces. There needs to be spaces for people to sit down and talk and discuss, and especially being locked up in their houses for a year. So, I'm talking with architects and space planners, that's where they kind of see things going. You can do your busy day-to-day work at your computer sitting at your dining room table, but you can't collaborate and brainstorm. Younger employees can't get their faces in front of leadership on a daily basis. You don't get to know your employee or your coworkers in a personal way so that you can go out to bat for them and for the greater good of the company as well. You're kind of losing that. So there's this real purpose for the office that exists. And those collaborative spaces, I think, will really help in that sense. So, just to kind of go back, it's not really less space, it's just different space. And how that's going to work, I don't think anyone wants to jump on any trend too quickly. When people are designing their office space, they're designing it for 5 to 10 years. So you don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to jump on some trend really quickly, but more kind of see how this unfolds. And maybe that's just as simple as a furniture redesign in your current office space.
Right. No, that's great. We just had this conversation amongst our own staff yesterday and really trying to get people back into the office, everyone back in a few days a week together. We miss that. And you're right. You just don't get that face-to-face interaction. You don't get those spontaneous conversations. And there is definitely a need for office space and for people to be back, at least for some semblance of time during the week. And I guess a follow-up question for you that I'm really interested in, I'm not sure if the rest of the group is going to care as much, but from the chamber perspective, we're so interested in development. And pre-pandemic, we've just seen, and we're still seeing, a boom in development in especially the Portland area, the greater Portland area. With COVID and with people just kind of trying to figure out what their needs are going to be for office space, do you see development slowing down, at least temporarily, while people figure out what they're going to need in the future? Or are you seeing development just continuing on as it was planned before?
Yeah, definitely a pause for new development. That might not seem evident right now driving around Portland. I think there are 6 or 7 buildings under construction. It looks like a building boom. Those were all transactions that happened pre-COVID. So, COVID definitely put a stop on any new, at least office construction. You still might see some hospitality. Obviously, residential is very strong right now. But in terms of the office, maybe mixed use development, it's a little bit of a pause at this point. Part of that has to do with increase in construction costs, which you've all, I'm sure, read about. And so that will take a little bit of pause. One thing that is common among a lot of office users right now is just uncertainty. And it's uncertainty about hybrid, how that's going to work or how long that's going to last. How many employees will you be coming into the office on a daily basis? Does it allow you to hire more without expanding your footprint? So those are really big questions that larger firms are asking themselves right now. And when I say larger firms, that's really what spurs these new construction in Portland, is the kickoff of an anchor tenant that is occupying at least 50% of a property. So without those large companies making those decisions at this moment, we are going to see a pause in new construction. Back in January, I was saying it was maybe 6 or 12 months, but it might even be a little bit longer than that at this point.
Right. But you're right, you wouldn't guess that with all the development happening, but those had come in pre-COVID. Before I open it to Q&A, Nate, you had mentioned this before everybody else hopped on the call, but I know Boulos is doing a survey. Do you want to mention that briefly to this group and whether it might be available for viewing after the fact? Because I think people would be interested in that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We ran a survey last fall, which was really geared towards the leadership side of companies in terms of how they were thinking about their space. And we didn't do it on a per employee basis. So it's a little skewed towards leadership because, I think all leadership wants to have everyone back in the office safely but quickly. But that being said, we're going to redo that survey. A lot has changed since last fall, and that should be coming out here next week or the week after. A lot of the same questions in terms of, what you're asking me is, are you going to shrink your footprint? What does your hybrid plan look like? Is that 3 days a week, 4 days a week? When will you be back in the office? I think a lot of companies have those answers now. They may not be publicly saying that, but I've heard from several clients that said, yeah, we have a plan in place. We're not ready to release that yet, but I think we know what we're doing. So that's what the information we'd really like to try and get, because this is kind of like the financial firms down in New York City, the first one to say you're coming back in the office, and then you saw several Morgan Stanley was first. Great. Now we can announce it. I think that's almost a little bit on a local level here too. It's kind of like, well, we don't want to be the first one to do this plan. What if things change? So, there's a little bit of that going on as well. Hopefully, our survey, which is all confidential, will be able to answer some of those questions. So, look out for that.
That's great. Thank you, Nate. So with that, we have about a half hour left. We have over 70 people on the call. So we'd like to open it up to some Q&A. I'm going to have Eamonn help me kind of navigate this. So if you've got a question for the panelists, or even just a comment or something you want to share about what your own organization is planning on doing, just raise your hand and we will we'll call on you. So let's open this up to some Q&A. It's so funny. I see nobody's faces. I totally can appreciate that, but I'd love to see people's faces too. I miss everybody. There's no questions. You all have it figured out. Eamonn, should we ask some survey questions of the group?
Yeah, I mean, we'd love folks to share. Also, what your company is planning on doing specifically around, when you might be returning to the office. And we've done a survey of some chamber members so far and found that the vast majority are allowing that hybrid work option, but really requiring around 3 days a week in the office. So, if folks want to share around that. And I do see a hand up from Judy Ann Smith. And so I think you should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my question. So I lead a very small nonprofit in the Portland area. At this point, there's only 4 staff. We may grow back to 6, but the pandemic hit us really hard. So we gave up our office space in March. We had been paying thousands of dollars a month in rent for the first year of the pandemic. And my board of directors and I just decided it wasn't worth it. So we're all home. But we're really looking to be able to come together a couple of times a week, at least in the coming year, and plan from there. Didn't know if some of the larger companies that have a lot of space that they're not using in Portland are allowing nonprofits to, pay some nominal amounts to have staff meetings or gatherings in that space, because I just can't afford a lease right now. And there is some of the workspace available, but you just can't count on it always being available. It's getting very, very popular, those places where you can rent a conference room for 20 hours, $20 an hour or something. So I'm trying to find something a little more steady.
So you're looking for something, not any type of space that you would use weekly, but like for a staff meeting, or every once in a while you might need a conference room for a staff meeting or some sort of committee meeting or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have something. I would say, every Wednesday we can go into this space and come together as a team and invite anybody else that we need to meet with and collaborate with. That would be great. But right now we don't have anything that regular. One of my board members has given us a board room at a hospital once a month. I think we have it for 2 hours. So, we're just trying to fill in some gaps.
Yeah, that's a really great approach. And I'll say, Judy Ann, that at the chamber, we have space. We have a large conference room and we have a small conference room that we let members use for free. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to try to establish a regular time that you can meet at the chamber. We'd be happy to accommodate. If there's anyone else on the call, some larger businesses who would also be willing to accommodate that, like, feel free to pop something in the chat And I do think that some businesses, who have large boardrooms or smaller conference rooms would be willing to help out a small nonprofit. So again, we'll see if anybody pops something into the chat, but we'd be happy to help look around as well to our members. And maybe that's even something we survey our members about. Like, do they have space if they would be willing to let a nonprofit utilize on a somewhat regular basis? And we could just get a list of spaces that are available for organizations.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Just so you know, we also relinquished all our memberships this past year. So we're not a chamber member right now. We just needed to give up all of the discretionary kind of expenses.
We'll work on that. I totally understand, and we would be happy to help you regardless. So we'll talk offline.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I do see a question from my good friend, Justin Lamontagne, who I don't see your face out there, but hi. Justin's asking, what are folks hearing about live events and presentations? When can we do that safely? It's a really good question. I can answer that just from my own personal perspective, and others may have some other thoughts, but just from the chamber perspective, we are slowly going back to live. I actually think this is one of our last virtual events that we're hosting. Not that we won't do these types of events virtually, in the future, because I think it's a really easy way for us to get together. Like, we don't have to be in person to have this conversation. Not that I don't want to see all of your beautiful faces in person, but we'll continue these events. But the chamber is going to go back to live events come September. I know some other organizations are already back live. I have a board meeting today that is now in person, which is so weird. It's like my whole schedule is booked so that I'm on meetings back to back to back because they're all on Zoom. And I'm quickly realizing that that can't work if I'm now traveling from one meeting to the next. So like that, I'm gonna have to recalibrate all of that. But that's what I'm hearing about events and presentations. Things are slowly going back in person. And I think by the fall, we're going to see a lot of people coming back live. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts around that, or if our presenters have heard anything along those lines.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any event folks on this call, but wearing a different hat as president of a local nonprofit board, we have an event in September that we plan on doing live. So we shopped around to venues, and it was extremely difficult to get a day at a venue in Portland come September. So it seems to me that that is kind of the point. Things are going to get busy again, at least in live.
Yeah. I see somebody else popped into the chat that, yeah, September, they're going back live.
We do have another question in the chat, and this one might speak to what you were talking about some, Kristina, with sort of the distributed workforce and the benefits and pitfalls that Maine might feel from that. Now that people have the opportunity to switch from working for a local Maine business to a better offer that they might get, higher pay from a big city, company, how do you keep people in Maine and living in Maine and perhaps working for Maine companies while they might be getting benefits and salaries, and better offers from companies outside of the state, but still maintaining their residence here and the great benefits of living in Maine?
I do think that that's going to be a real challenge. I mean, Maine employers' competitive advantage has always been our quality of life, that when you live here, you love it, and therefore we can offer lower salaries and benefits. And now if you can live here and love it and not take lower salaries and benefits, I think it is going to be a real challenge for employers, which is partly why, our preliminary research is indicating that employers in Maine may have to make special efforts to provide employees as much choice as possible. I know for our staff, we're about 40. The flexibility has always been one of our competitive advantages, and we have a lot of part-time moms and other things like that that has been useful to us if we're not able to compete on other sides. So I think it's going to be a particular challenge for Maine employers.
I would also suggest that for Maine employers too, I think that as we look at some professional positions that, we're going to have to think long and hard about what our compensation philosophy is and be very transparent about that. Are we paying a local wage? Are we paying a regional wage? Are we paying a national wage? And do we pay it based on where the company is or where the person is? And then what do you do if they relocate to another area? How do you make adjustments for that? And I think that's a very complex and complicated challenge that we are over time going to be presented with. And so I think we need to begin to think about our workforce and what makes sense for them. And we got to be really attractive here in Maine so that people will want to be here, stay here, come here, remain here. It's a challenge, but I think being very transparent about what your practice is will be very helpful.
And just to kind of add on to what Catherine's saying, this is going to be a challenging transition as employers are getting more remote employees, at least from a legal perspective. And I think Catherine alluded to this earlier. You know, there's a question of if you're a Maine employer and you're hiring someone in North Carolina or you're hiring someone in Illinois and they're going to work out of Illinois, the question is which state laws do apply? Do I need to have a handbook supplement for Illinois? Which payroll laws do apply? And you may be primarily Maine based. You may not have offices in different jurisdictions, and so you may not be familiar with this at all. And then you're stuck here like, well, now I have to comply with Illinois law. I don't know anything about Illinois law. I don't know anything about payroll requirements in Illinois. I don't know anything about workers' comp in Illinois. And while it may be easier for you, or it may be beneficial for you in some ways to go and hire someone and have them telecommute in that sense, there are a lot of different considerations that you have to think about. And what I'm hearing from employers, I do think it's a challenge keeping Maine-based talent at Maine-based employers because of the pay discrepancy. And it just, you know, it just so happens that they're getting priced out of the real estate market now. I mean, you can't buy a house on a Maine salary because everyone from out of state is coming in with all cash offers, you know, going $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over asking. But something for employees to think about is if you're going to work remotely, I work with employers in so many different jurisdictions throughout the United States. And even if you're working remotely for, say, a New York-based employer or a Chicago or Boston-based employer, like even you may be based in Maine, but the culture is still very, very different. Maine businesses have a much different culture than Manhattan-based businesses. And that's something that employees need to think about. I mean, there's a reason you will be getting paid more to work at a business that's based in Manhattan. The expectations are different, the culture is different, the flexibility is different. So that's what I'm seeing from my clients, both in terms of trying to induce employees to stay here and also in terms of hiring employees from out of state, or a lot of people are even hiring employees remotely out of the country, which of course has its own complexities in terms of immigration laws and what employment laws apply in those different countries. So it's a lot more complicated than it may seem at first blush.
Oh yeah, great point, Peter. I was talking to an employer in Maine yesterday who has had this like rush of employees who have left to go work for like Google and Facebook and all these high-tech companies out west. And because they can stay here, but work remotely, and I'm assuming they're getting paid more money. I don't know what the culture is like at those organizations, but you know, it's one of those things that cuts both ways. It's like people can, you know, we're such an attractive place, and like we want people to move here, but people that are here can now live here and have all the benefits of living here, but work anywhere. So it'll be really interesting how that plays out over time. Peter, there's a question that was posed to you in the chat that I will ask you. I just lost it. There it is. Is it okay for employers to ask at a job interview if someone has been vaccinated? If so, is there pending litigation to challenge being allowed to ask this question?
That's a great question. I'm looking at, so I have pulled up here is the guidance from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who came out with some updated guidance last month. For a job interview, I guess I'd have to know a little bit more about what your requirements are. I mean, if you're an organization who's saying if you're vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, and if you're not vaccinated, or if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, and if you're not, then you do have to wear a mask. I think that answers the question. But right now, you're allowed to ask employees if they've been vaccinated. My understanding, and I just want to confirm this, is that you can do the same thing for for a job applicant. You have to be very careful, however. I say that with many caveats, because you have to be very careful, and you have to be very, very narrow with what you ask people, because it can very quickly turn into disability related inquiries, or they can very quickly start sharing information with you that now, you venture into their religion, you venture into medical issues that they're dealing with. And then all of a sudden you have obligations that you didn't have before, you have knowledge that maybe you didn't want before. It may be safer, and I think it is, rather than just coming out and saying, are you vaccinated? Are you not vaccinated? Sharing if you have a policy, if you have an office policy about vaccination and unvaccinated, it may be safer to just share the policy with them and open the conversation that way. I'm hesitant to say, go ahead and ask, are you vaccinated? Because it just can quickly spiral into a much bigger conversation that you really don't want it to be. So I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I will just say briefly, the guidance from the federal government in terms of current employees is, it is okay to ask current employees, have you been vaccinated or have you not been vaccinated? But similarly, there are a lot of caveats to that, and it can quickly, that simple inquiry can quickly morph into something that could be problematic for you. So I know I kind of answered the question, but didn't answer the question. But I'm getting this a lot from clients, and usually I need a lot more facts, and I need to better understand sort of what your policies look like. What it is you're trying to accomplish here. Is there another way you can get this information without making that direct inquiry? Because I think there are probably safer ways to do it than just saying yes or no, answer this question.
Okay, that's good advice. And here's another question in the chat that I'm going to kind of throw out to all of our panelists, but have you seen any changes to employer benefit plans or offerings to employees now that many are working hybrid or primarily from home? For instance, offering various ways to maintain the corporate responsibility goals and or company culture.
So I'll start with that. When our program renews this past year, we've looked at it, and we did offer additional benefit programs specifically aimed at people's personal mental health challenges and challenges related to being remote, isolation, challenges with not feeling safe and so forth. And we made those programs available as part of our benefit offering so that people could access them from home and have the kinds of services that they needed. We looked at corporate responsibility goals, values, our culture and so forth. We look at that very separately from a benefit program, and are working diligently on our strategic plan and pushing all of that information out to employees so that they see it and they have an opportunity to respond, to comment, and to help us develop those things. And that's been an initiative that's actually been going on as we've been through this pandemic, and we're very intentional about our communication to employees so that they understand where we are, what we're doing, and hopefully where we're going, so that they are participating in the direction of the organization. Because without our employees, where are we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the mental health needs of employees, because that's been a big topic of conversation with a lot of our membership. Just, the pandemic was really hard on so many levels, and employees struggled for so many different reasons. And I know employers are looking at ways that they can be more supportive of their teams around those mental health needs. So I'm really glad, Catherine, that you brought that up as part of this conversation.
Sometimes it's just learning some coping skills for those that are, spending a whole year with children at home and elder care and, sick individuals that you're trying to care for and trying to work. Sometimes we need an avenue to help facilitate, the transition and to take care of ourselves while doing all these other things. So that was really helpful for us.
Right. Thank you.
So Nate, I've got a fun one for you, perhaps, before we wrap up. Yesterday I was reading, I think it's BlackRock in New York. They just recently leased a new space, and they actually put a speakeasy for their employees in the space to sort of attract them to come back to the office as a fun, perk of being back in the office. I doubt we're seeing any of that here in Portland, but are there any amenities that are sort of must-haves that property owners are putting into office spaces, that might be vacant right now as they try to attract new tenants? Probably on the lower scale than that.
Yeah, geez, New York City is so much cooler than Portland. So no, I haven't seen landlords make any investments into incentives. I think they're just trying to be patient with this market. Office leasing demand is still a little low. That might change if this goes much longer, but some of the trends that started even pre-COVID, just more bicycle, parking and maybe more lobby lounge areas, that sort of thing, but nothing as like that at all. It is employers have to incentivize their employees to get back into the office. And so that's a real conversation. And I've even talked with Catherine about this too, about, how can, right now everyone's still under a voluntary, come into the office if you want to. So other than saying, well, come and talk with your colleagues, or, we have more lounge areas, what else can an employer do to get those folks back into the office? And I think it's just making everyone comfortable, offering that flexibility. And so I'm not sure we've seen any real trends come forth right now. I don't know if there are any other business leaders here that can maybe mention how they're trying to incentivize employees to get back into the office. But just making for a fun and relaxed environment, I think is really key.
Eamonn, I'll offer that, some of our staff, they're so eager to see each other and be in an in-person meeting together. And so one of the ways that we're trying to think about our office space, we're still totally closed, although we did open up for the heat to allow people to come in and, experience the air conditioning. But one of the things that we're thinking about is the office as a destination for a meeting. So many of us are, usually running around Greater Portland having meetings, and we enjoy interacting with our colleagues. And so rather than saying you need to be in the office 1 or 2 days a week, we say, if your team is meeting on this project, it's going to be an in-person meeting. And it's, I think maybe offering an espresso machine might be, not quite as good as a speakeasy, but, something where there are some, ways that people can enjoy breaking bread or drinking coffee together and having an in-person meeting.
Yeah, Kristina, I think you're right that, when I talked about a redesign of an office space earlier with more meeting spaces and more collaborative spaces, that's kind of exactly what I was talking about. And even I had a client the other day say that, he came into the office, he's going in 2 days a week, and he sat at the conference room just to kind of do his busy work. And then 3 other people in the office left their offices and went to the conference room to go sit. And they didn't talk about anything. They were just together working. That's really interesting. And there's this whole psychological piece of this that I'm not qualified to talk about, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like the espresso machine idea. I really like the speakeasy idea. Eamonn, we can work on that. We do have some extra space in our office, and I've already got some really creative ideas. So let me just take a moment and see if there's any additional questions. And I will also ask if there are specific resources we can provide to you, either from any of the panelists who spoke or just anything else that would be helpful. Like, please feel free to chat me, you could chat everybody, you could chat me. Let me know what you need. We are here, like, we don't have all the answers, but we know the people who have a lot of the answers, and we had invited those panelists here today. We're here to help you as we all try to transition back to the workplace in some fashion. I know there are so many questions out there. I think we got a lot of great advice and information today. And I know everyone's just really curious what everyone else is doing. I forgot who said it, but it's like everyone's waiting for like someone to make the first move and then people will follow. We all want to do right by our employees, and we all want to have a safe and a welcoming environment, while also maintaining some of the great lessons that we learned in COVID, that we can work remotely and we can get the job done, and we can allow our employees much more flexibility than we have in the past. So if there's anything more we can provide to you, do not hesitate to reach out to Eamonn and I. We will get out an email to this group. I know several of the panelists have done presentations in the past around coming back to the workforce or coming back to the workplace post-COVID. We'll compile a bunch of those resources in a single email and get it out to all of you. But again, if there's anything else we can provide, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're doing a survey that I think you all should have gotten in like probably all of the emails about this event. Take a moment to fill that out. We are happy to provide the results of that survey to all of our members, so you can kind of see where other companies are in their thought process. But again, please just know we are here as a resource for you, and we're all in this together, and this is everybody's first pandemic, so we're all trying to figure it out a little bit on the fly. So with that, I don't see any final questions. I see some great comments in the chat. Thank you, thank you. So I guess finally, just a huge thank you to Pete and to Kristina and to Catherine and to Nate. Thank you for being such awesome partners of the Chamber and for all you do for us in the community. Also, a huge thank you to all of you who joined us today. And again, just reach out if we can be of help. And try to stay cool in this scorching heat. We will be at the Chamber. Eamonn and I are both at home, but we are heading to the nice air conditioning of the Chamber. And if anybody needs like some refuge from the heat, stop on in. We've got an extra office and 2 conference rooms that you are welcome to use. So come see us. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Quincy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.